Hello and welcome back to Nolan Financial Radio. My name is Tara Nolan from Nolan Financial, and welcome everybody to the show. So, if you're new to the show, Chris and I do like to take people's questions, after the fact. So, please feel free to give us a call at 719-210-4242. You can also visit our website at www.nolanfinancial.com. Check out what we look like, what kind of services we offer, and see if it feels like we might be a good fit. We're going to talk today about should you unretire? But before we jump into that, just let me remind you if you're new, or let you know if you're new, that you can click on my radio page of my website. And when you're there, you can see all the past shows. We do lots of educational topics from IRAs, 401ks, Social Security, healthcare. And you can also subscribe to the program on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or to go ahead and set up the face-to-face or virtual meeting. That's 719-210-4242. So before we jump into our amazing topic today, I want to touch base with my co-host, Tony Shore. Tony, how are you doing today?
Hey, that's me. All right, Tara, I'm doing good. And it's good to be here. I'm excited about today's show because it's taking a kind of different approach than we normally do. It's something fresh, so I like it. I've had a great week. In fact, I've really kept busy. Whenever a new year starts, it's like you got to buckle down and really. I like to go into it full steam. Work up a good full head of steam to get going for the year to carry me through and stay positive. And as you say, you recently posted, be a mentor. And Tara, you and Chris have been a mentor to me. I really look up to you guys, and you guys really do a lot. I admire the fact that you get out there and you work at staying healthy and active. So that's important. And that's going to be a priority of mine this year as well. And it should always be a priority, actually. But how about you? How are you and Chris doing, Tara?
Oh, we are staying busy, getting after everything. So, the new year starting, I'm looking into my inspirational things because, I love the business and the work, but what really keeps me going is the extra stuff. So I am getting started on a program to launch a TEDx talk, which I think
Oh,
is going to be a lot of
wow.
fun.
That's
And
awesome.
anyone who listens to my show knows that I really love, in addition to finance, the larger thing I love is helping people get that aha moment where they get it and go, oh, this makes sense to me. And
Yes.
so that's what this is all about, is trying to bring some clarity to something that can either be mind-numbingly boring or it just brings out all your stress.
Yeah. Exactly. And that sounds like retirement, right? For some, it can be mind-numbingly boring, or it can be a way to relieve stress. But that's why we're going to talk about the topic we're going to talk about today. I think it's an interesting one, right? Unretiring.
It's what's interesting, Tony, and for people listening is I think this should just be everyone should know this is normal. And people
Yeah.
unretire for many reasons.
Yeah.
My goal as a financial planner is that you unretire because you want to, not because you have to for financial reasons.
Right. Unfortunately, some people do unretire or go back to work in retirement because they have to. But for
Mhm.
many, it's because they want to, or maybe they need to. They need that in retirement. And there are a lot of aspects of that. So I know we're going to talk about the pros and cons of unretiring today. And I like that way of putting it, because if you say going back to work, that sounds so negative. But unretiring, it's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
I think it's a wonderful thing, but Tony, I guess the way I view life, anything that you do with intentionality and choice is a good thing.
That's true. There you go. There you go. I like that. That makes sense. I like that. Anything you do with intentionality and choice is a good thing.
And so what we want to talk about. So I'm always reading, and I came across this article in the US News and World Report, and it brought up some points that we're going to get into. So I thought I'd kick off, Tony, just by kind of letting everybody know the points we're going to discuss, and then we'll
Sure.
just jump right in.
Yeah.
So when you're unretiring, you first thing that we're really going to discuss is why do you want to go back to work? If you don't know your why, then that's going to be a challenge,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
For sure.
The
Right.
second thing is you want to adequately weigh your home life and your budget. and we'll get into some of those. I have some stories about that.
Mhm.
You want to thoroughly research what's available, right? So if you're going to go back to work, you don't have to fall into doing the exact same thing unless you want to. But there's a whole wide world out there.
There is. It is a great big wide world, and it might be a good opportunity to change it up, right?
It definitely. And then, of course, like always, we wanna make sure that you understand how doing a decision to go back to work could potentially impact your Social Security, because you don't wanna lose out on money because you didn't know what the rules were.
Right. Yeah, and we'll go over some of those things in detail, but I think any financial decision you make, especially during retirement, especially if it could have an effect on Social Security, you need to be working with a financial services professional like yourselves, like you and Chris. Tara, this is what you do, Tara, to help your clients, and I think that's really important. So if you're not currently working with somebody, this is a good reason to have a plan in place. Do I need to go back to work in retirement? Do I need to unretire? Do I want to unretire? And why would I want to do that? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to start with, one of the main reasons I see, Tony, with almost every client I have when they hit retirement, um, after about 6 months, they're itching to do something.
Right.
And, they miss out on having the community of people that they had when they went to work. They miss having, that little bit of structure in their day. I've had people say, the high quality of life is waking up with no alarm. But after a while, you kind of want to have something to get up for.
You have to, and that's what keeps people going. That could mean a shorter along the difference between a shorter or long life right there too. You need to stay active. You need to have a purpose, I think, is part of it as well. That's what you're saying is part of why you want to unretire is probably to have a purpose. Like you said, 6 months. I just think of people who, you can only golf. You can golf every single day for so long, or watch so many TV shows back to back, or
Right.
sit on the couch or the porch and read books. All those things, nothing wrong with any of those things. I love to read, and I am glad people get out and play golf. I'm not a golfer, but after a while, after about 6 months of that, you might want something to give you some purpose.
Exactly. And it's a lot of people spent their life working, 20, 30 years. And so they never really had time to kind of develop that creative side of themselves or find their hobby or passion. And so going that break from work to no work, it's hard. It's just like
Right.
a splash of, the ice bucket challenge over your head.
Right. It's like an ice pick to the forehead.
And so, I try to talk to people about start kind of before you retire, try to find some time to explore different, hobbies. And one of the great ways I love here in Colorado Springs, and I'm sure it's true everywhere, is there are so many different nonprofits here. And, whether your interest is teaching or art or nature, find something like that that you can have some purpose and structure, contributing to a nonprofit, and then check out what you like. You start to get to meet some other people, and then you kinda get a sense of, "Is this something I love, or is this just something I thought I liked?"
Right. Right.
And
You've gotta have a way to fill that extra time, right?
well, and ideally, you find something that you strikes that passion and makes you just have that,
Yeah.
vibration of just good energy where you're just excited. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what you really wanna find.
Exactly.
And the thing is, Tony, is I don't know tons of people, though, that do go back to work, especially my engineer types, because it's really hard to simulate that, stimulation of the brain and have that kind of interaction. And, going to a gardening club may not just stimulate your brain the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratories and you were, coming up with these things, and then you wanna replace that activity or those goals with, a gardening club, that may be tough.
Well, and I just had fun. A friend of mine, he's taking his turn as the stay-at-home dad with the youngest of 4 that they just had,
Oh,
and,
wow.
he and I meet for coffee every now and again and just talk real estate investing and notes and because he's just glad to have adult conversation.
Right, I bet he is.
But I think it's the same thing when you retire, is all of a sudden you go from being around people talking at your level with your interests, and all of a sudden you're going, who do I talk to?"
Right.
And maybe
Right.
your spouse is into it, but your spouse might be saying one of my favorite stories is a friend of mine, up in Boulder, her husband retired, and he was getting under her feet because she had worked from home the whole time, and she's like, "You gotta go somewhere. I don't care where." And she's like, "He gets up every day, he gets dressed, and he leaves, and he comes back about 6 hours later." And I said, "Well, where does he go?" And she's like, "I have no idea."
Yeah, it's why my mom said why their, marriage has lasted so long, like 60 some years, because, your father was an over the road trucker and he was gone a lot. That's why our marriage worked. He was gone a lot.
You know, here's the thing is there's no right or wrong way.
Yeah, she's half kidding, but you know what I mean, yeah.
I do, yeah.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder sometimes.
And, everybody's gotta figure out what works for them. So
Yeah,
the bottom line here though is just, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and you gotta find your why. Once you know why you're gonna do something, then the plan to make it happen will fall into place very naturally.
right.
So
Right, and then but also financially, on the other side, it might not just be boredom, it might be a real need, and a lot of people do have to go back to work. Obviously, there's a need sometimes if you need to pay the bills, right?
definitely, there's a need to pay the bills that can happen, and there's also, once you're home and you have more time, then you start looking around the house and looking at all those projects that you've been putting off for years, and even if you're doing it yourself, A, you're gonna spend a lot of time at Lowe's or Home Depot buying tools, and
Money.
B, things just still cost money. You still gotta buy the
Yeah,
supplies, and you gotta do the things. So I have a lot of clients, Tony, that really decide that they wanna go back to work part-time just so they can, play and not have to worry about it
right.
and have the money that they wanna play with. But Tony, like you're saying, life happens, sometimes maybe one of your kids or even a grandkid moves back in with you unexpectedly, or, um, there's just things in life that just happen. There's just like a whole list. I'm sure everybody listening could probably raise their hand and type in a story if we were
Sure.
doing this. Um, so you definitely if you have the ability, it's a great option because if you here's the thing, is when you go back to work, then it lets your retirement accounts continue to grow, right? And the longer you let your money work for you,
Mhm.
then that just makes your retirement get better. So if you can
Yeah.
go back to work now, and then that covers your day-to-day stuff for another few years, just makes everything better.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. That's true, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the job in which you started off in. Like you said, you might want to try something new, and it doesn't have to be full time. But we do see more and more people either working later into their lives or retiring and then maybe taking on something else for that extra income.
They do that, and Tony, I feel like the millennials are probably gonna be people that do that because we're living longer. And, of course, I'm just brushing with a broad stroke, but I see a lot of my clients, their kids that are in their 20s and entering their 30s are still in situations where they're figuring themselves out, where they're living with roommates, they're doing different things. It's very different. When I was 26, I was, a pilot in the Air Force, and I felt like I was so far behind in investing and doing things. But I see kids now that are that I say kids, I see kids that are that age now, 26, and they're like,
Uh,
what do I don't even need to worry about any of that yet. So, we are just creating societally a shift of how long
mhm.
we're gonna work. And Tony, don't you feel like I feel like we're working more towards having that work-life balance?
Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of companies and as individuals have realized it and demanded it, companies are getting better about providing a work-life balance for their employees. I think COVID really, pushed us in that direction, obviously, with the work from home. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, if they have the ability to work from home, that way they can, maybe take care of the kids, maybe don't have to have daycare, things like that. They can work on their own time schedule rather than an 8 to 5. That helps. So, yes, a lot of these things, I see that trend happening a lot.
Well, and I can tell you for myself, that's exactly what I did. I left the Air Force active duty at 15 years, and people were like, "Whoa, what are you crazy? You could go to 20 and be retired." But I had just been deployed so much that I was like, A lot can happen in 5 years. I don't wanna put my life on hold for 5 years." And
Right.
so I shifted, and it's just opened my life up. So now I'm still in the Air Force Reserve, so I still get to serve, but I have I'm an entrepreneur, and I've gotten to start a business where I get to help people. So
Right.
what's ended up, like, if you were to draw a visual, it's like, my weaving on my life, there's not a hard stop at, 65, and then I go into retirement. I've kind of been enjoying taking little, a 4 or 5 months here and there to enjoy myself, and then I work hard, and then so it's just weaving together in a different way
Right.
than almost like the old factory model where, you got your factory job and you worked for 20, 30 years, and then you got your retirement.
Yep. Yeah, it's
And
not the dynamics are changing. It's not as set in stone as it used to be. We're seeing that change a lot. My brother-in-law works for the government, and I've seen a lot of people do this in different industries, not just federal employees, but other jobs where you can work, and especially if it is involved with the government, the state or the federal, you can get a pension, retire, collect your pension, but then go back to doing the same
Mhm.
thing as a consultant. And so you've got your pension coming in, but you also got you have your so technically you retire from your job, but you're going to keep working as a consultant. And
Right.
sometimes the consultants make more than they did when they were fully employed, but they have their pension and their consulting job. So it is interesting, and a spouse plays a part in this, right? I mean, it's this is all this talking about unretiring. It's a whole different scenario if you're doing it if you have a spouse versus if you're on your own, right?
There's definitely, and then, Tony, I think we just need to take a minute. So we've been talking high level, but in terms of budget, if you're gonna make the decision to go back to work, that is gonna start with your financial plan, and you look
Sure.
at, "Here's the money I have," and I create for people what we call a spend plan and say, "Here's how much money you have. If you didn't work another day in your life, here's how long that money would last. If you wanna be able to spend more money, then you're gonna have to go back to work," right? So you don't have
Right.
it's not a guessing game. You just
Nope.
look at what you have and say, "If you did nothing till you pass, here's where you're gonna be if you wanna," so that way you can make, data supported decisions.
Educated decisions. Yes, and
Yes.
that's what you do is educate. So how can our listeners you should not make any of these decisions without working with a financial professional like yourself. How can they get a hold of you and Chris to set up that complimentary, no cost, no obligation consultation?
Sure, Tony, that number is 719-210-4242, and it's 719-210-4242. And Tony, this is especially for people when they're looking at unretiring and they're considering doing some of that, like maybe getting a rental property or investing in a business and trying to look at, well, I'm considering maybe doing something with my nest egg that would be a little risky, and how would I manage that? And is there any way to mitigate that risk? And so
Right.
those are kinds of questions we like to get in and help people get after.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important. And I know that you have a lot of resources on your website as well. What's the website address for your new site?
Sure, Tony. The website is www.nolanfinancialpartners.com.
All right, nolanfinancialpartners.com. And that website has a lot of great resources, including a radio show page where you can listen to this show, past shows, subscribe to the show as a podcast. So I'm just trying to encourage our listeners to reach out. And let's not forget about that book you wrote. Money Moves, that's really a great book. And I know that if our listeners set up a consultation with you, and mention the radio show or that they saw the show on online, that you will give them a copy of the book. Is that correct?
That's correct, Tony. Money moves. It's available on Amazon, but if you meet with me for an appointment, I will give you a copy as part of the deal. Because
All right.
it's so important that you understand your why.
Yeah, exactly. Understanding the why is huge. That's the biggest step, and then creating the plan. And that's what we're talking about is a plan that might have to include unretiring or might need to include, and you might want to include unretiring. I think a lot of people are choosing that path as a choice, not just because they have to. And I think it's a good thing.
And I wanted to share a story with you that kind of talks about unretiring and also through the lens of Social Security.
Okay.
So, I probably have 20 clients that went through this, but I'll just share a story about my mom.
Okay.
She was a nurse and she went to med school late, so when she was like 42. So she hadn't been a doctor as long as all of her other doctor peers. But, they were reaching 65 and starting to retire. And she's like, "Well, I'm going to be 65. It's time to retire." I'm like, "But you haven't been a doctor for all that long." "Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's just time." "Okay, but what are you gonna do because you love what you do, but it's time to" I mean, we got caught in this loop.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
we went ahead and she signed up for Social Security and did all that, and Tony, it wasn't 6 months for her, it was 2 months. And she
Ah!
was like, "The school called me and the med school, and they want me to come in and teach part-time." I'm like, "Well, do you wanna do that?" "Well, yeah. It's gonna be a lot more money and a lot less time." And so I was like, "Oh boy, okay, well, this is gonna have some implications because you started your Social Security and you
Yep.
did these things."
Yep.
So we had to walk some things back, and
Yep.
we were lucky that we had started early enough because we were able to pay back the money that she had gotten from Social Security and postpone it till delay it till she was 70, which because there's if you take Social Security too early, especially before your full retirement age, you actually don't even get the full amount because you're gonna pay it
R
back in taxes.
right.
So there's just a lot of little considerations with that you wanna look at. And then for her, Tony, it ended up so she did wait until she was 70, and the difference was from $1,800 a month to almost $3,200 a month.
Yeah, that's huge.
And that's a big difference when you're in full retirement and you're not making any more money.
Plus, if you let's say you unretire and go back to work full time, and you've been, let's say you retired and at 64 and you just went ahead and took your Social Security, even though it wasn't full retirement age, you can take it as early as 62. It's greatly reduced, but you can take it. And then all of a sudden, yeah, I want to go back to work or I feel I need to, and you go back to work full time and you're making all this money. Well, they're not going to keep paying you that Social Security amount that you're getting if you're earning too much. So you really need a strategy, and I know you and Chris help your clients out with that, right?
Yeah, we definitely look at that because, I mean, it's not gonna stop you doing what you wanna do, but you just don't
Right,
wanna leave money on the table because you didn't
right.
know the rules.
Right, exactly. And even if for I think it's for every $2 you make, Social Security holds back $1 if you make over a certain amount, and it's low. Like if you're making over 19,000 a year, they start holding Social Security back. You don't necessarily lose that, but you've already locked in a lower monthly rate, and you won't start getting it again until you retire from that full time job or are making less in an income in the I don't know what it is now. It was 19,000 a year. It changes every year, but last year I believe it was 19,000. But I think that's an important thing to note. Social Security strategies play a big part in going back to work in retirement, and I think that was your point, right?
Well, so she did for Social Security. Obviously, she was interested because teaching, has a passion for it. But
Sure.
the other thing is I have, 4 brothers and a little sister and a lot of nieces and nephews that are still young. So what my mom, which she's, in good health right now, she wanted to be able to travel. And so we're talking
See the
Seattle and
grandkids.
DC and Iowa, all over the country. And
Sure.
Tony, that's not cheap.
No.
Flying all over the country. So, with her going back to work, not only was she actually making more money than she probably ever had for the hours that she was working, then she had just this whole extra pile of cash that she hadn't planned on at all. So she was able to just like with mentally clear space, travel to see the grandkids, spend the money, and it didn't impact the retirement plan that we had in place.
Hmm. Wow, that's
So it
great.
just gave a whole level of freedom that was really cool.
Yeah, I think that is cool. Well, this is an important topic. There's a lot of things apparently people need to consider before they unretire, right?
Yeah, it's just try to get there. Ideally, come talk to me before you're gonna retire so that we can get you in a plan. So then
Right.
you can take, 6 months to a year and take that time to research, what's out there. Do you wanna be involved in a nonprofit? Do you wanna go back to work as a consultant? Do you wanna do something totally different? But then you get to take that time to research it because think about it, for a lot of people, it's not really since, like, college that they've ever had this chance to go, "What do I wanna be when I grow up?"
Right.
You've been
Exactly.
you've been responsible for everybody else, and this is the first point in your life where you kinda get to take a minute and go, "Hey, let me introduce me to myself."
Yeah. That's fun. That's fun. And there are, I think about the strategies if you're married and you retire and want to go back to work. might depend on where your spouse is at. Are they retired as well, or are they still working full time? So
Mhm.
it really fits into the overall financial and retirement plan that you've come up with. And if you don't have a plan, wow, you need to get one, especially if you're already retired. You need to have a written plan in place so you know where you're headed. And, can I do this? Should I do this? Do I need to do this? That type of thing.
Life is hard enough, and if you're going at it without any kind of a plan, it just makes it that much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love this concept you came up with, unretiring. And I think that's important. A lot of listeners may end up doing that. As we talked about at the beginning of the show, the trends are really trending that way. People, it's not a standard, hey, I turned 66, now I'm retiring, I'm not going to work anymore. It does, that's happening less and less, it seems.
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of that shift where we're not in that factory, the car companies, that life has just shifted, and our notion of retirement, I think in another 50 years, I don't even know if it'll be a thing anymore.
Right. Yeah, it just keeps changing rapidly. So now I know you address things like working in retirement and other things in your book, Money Moves. There's a lot in there. I want to encourage our listeners. It's available at Amazon.com. So pick up a copy of Tara's book, Money Moves, and it is available at Amazon.com. Written by our very own Tara Nolan. Tara, that's awesome. I know you worked hard on that book for a few years, and it's really a good one.
And I'd love if you when you get a copy of the book, if you can leave a honest review on Amazon, that is super cool, because
Yeah.
that's when Amazon then starts to promote the book internally, and that's when it
Yes.
really starts to reach more people and help more people.
Yep. I think that's really, really important. Well, we're winding down here, but before we go, you should let our listeners know how they can set up a consultation with you and Chris and get that financial plan, a retirement income plan, and a plan to maybe unretire in place.
Yeah, Tony, the number is 719-210-4242. That's 719-210-4242. And just to recap, step 1 is you need to know why you're making the decisions that you're making, and step 2 is you need to have a plan that gets you there.
Yeah.
And that's what Chris and I will help you do. So if you're listening to the show today and you don't have a plan that you can look at and say, "This fully supports my goals in life," let us help you. That
Yeah.
number is 719-210-4242.
All right. Well, Tara, thank you so much for that. Great show today. Unretiring, a novel concept, but it's becoming more and more common. So, listeners, again, give Tara and Chris a call. That does it for today's episode of Nolan Financial Radio with our host, Tara Nolan.
Join us soon for another episode of Nolan Financial Radio. Take care, and we'll talk with you next time.